The galaxy laughed at human myths until Earth's fleet arrived without warning. The distress beacon had been silent for 9 hours before engineer Thomas Reyes noticed. That was the first anomaly. Beacons don't go silent. They fail catastrophically, screaming emergency codes until power dies, or they transmit normally. They don't just. Rhys stood in the monitoring station of Crosspoint Depot, a maintenance hub serving 17 research outposts along the periphery reach, and stared at the flat line where Station Lyra's signal should have been. Could be a transmitter fault, said Chone, his second. She didn't sound convinced. Lyra's redundancy system has 4 independent arrays. Rhys tapped the display, calling up the station's maintenance logs. All green, last check 36 hours ago. Run a diagnostic sweep, full spectrum. The sweep came back clean. Every frequency, silent. Rhys felt something cold settle in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the recycled air of the depot. Get a shuttle prepped, he said quietly. Medical kit and recording equipment. I want everything logged. The flight to Lyra took 40 minutes. Rhys spent it reviewing the station manifest. Population 37. 3 species. Xenobiology research facility, studying protein synthesis in vacuum-adapted organisms. Boring work, safe work. The kind of assignment scientists requested when they wanted to focus without distraction. The station appeared intact through the viewport. Lights active, solar panels deployed, no visible damage, heat signatures normal. Life support running. Lyra Station, this is Maintenance Shuttle Victor 7, do you copy? Chun tried for the 5th time. Silence. They docked. The airlock cycled normally, interior pressure nominal. Reyes stepped into the corridor and immediately knew something was profoundly wrong. The lights were on. Coffee sat in mugs on desks, still warm. A datapad lay on the floor where someone had dropped it, screen active, showing an unfinished equation. And 37 sentient beings stood or sat throughout the station, eyes open, breathing normally, completely motionless, not dead, not asleep, empty. Chosen touched one of them, a Borean researcher. 4 arms frozen in mid-gesture. Pulse is normal, respiration normal, neural activity. She checked her medical scanner. Chosen's hand started shaking. Thomas, there's activity in the autonomic centers, but the higher cognitive functions, there's nothing. It's like the consciousness is just gone. Reyes moved through the station in a daze, recording everything. A meal half-eaten. Shower running in the residential section. In the main lab, 2 scientists stood facing each other, mouths open, caught mid-conversation. Whatever had happened, it had been instantaneous. He found the station commander's office last. Commander Urin, a Quellan with compound eyes that reflected the light from a dozen different angles, sat at her desk, 4-fingered hands resting on a report. Reyes looked at the screen. A message, half-written. Unusual readings in the neurological monitoring equipment. All 3 species showing simultaneous pattern disruption in. That was where it ended. Back on the shuttle, Chone was trying to raise Crosspoint. Depot, this is Victor 7. We have a situation requiring immediate medical evac. She stopped, listening, turned to Reyes, face pale. Depot isn't responding. The cold thing in Reyes's chest turned to ice. The Convergence assembly occupied a ring station massive enough to generate its own gravity through rotation. 43 species sent representatives to the Great Circular Chamber where treaties were negotiated, trade routes established, and territorial disputes mediated. It was considered the highest achievement of galactic civilization, proof that thousands of cultures could cooperate peacefully. Envoy Kaida Ogun had been attending sessions for 9 months, and mostly she had been bored. That changed the moment Archivist Mir entered the chamber, moving faster than his species normally moved, mandibles clicking in distress. Arbiter Zenthis, Mir said, his voice rendered into standard through translation nodes. We have a situation developing across 4 sectors. Multiple stations reporting communication loss. Technical failures are not assembly business, Zenthis replied. The crystalline being's voice resonated with harmonic precision, beautiful and cold. Present the matter to, not failures, Arbiter. Silence. Mir projected data across the chamber's display spheres. 17 locations in the past 6 hours. No distress signals, no emergency responses, no Kaida stood. Every species representative turned to look at the human. She kept her voice level, professional, but she knew what the data meant before Mir finished speaking. Arbiter Zenthis, I request emergency session protocol. Earth's diplomatic corps has information relevant to this situation. Critical information. Zenthis's crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Envoy Ogun, humanity joined the assembly 9 months ago. What information could your species possibly possess about? We call them silence events. Kaida interrupted. Protocol violation, but time mattered now. 15 decades ago, Earth experienced 4 colonies, total population 1.3 million, went silent within 3 hours. We found them alive, catatonic, conscious minds extracted, leaving only basic autonomic function. The chamber erupted. 43 species trying to speak simultaneously through translation nodes created a cacophony that the station's AI couldn't pass. Xenthus brought order with a harmonic tone that cut through the noise. Envoy Ogun, you are claiming Earth has dealt with this phenomenon before, successfully. Not successfully, Arbiter. We lost 800,000 people permanently. The rest we retrieved, but the psychological damage. Kaida pulled up Earth's classified files, transmitted them to the Assembly Archive. We've spent 15 decades studying this, developing countermeasures, training personnel. Marshal Thyron Koss, the Borean Confederacy's military representative, rose on 4 legs. Training for what? A threat you cannot define is a threat you cannot counter. What military force did Earth deploy? None, Kaida said quietly. This isn't a military threat, Marshal. It's psychological warfare. Except the warfare part implies intention. What we face doesn't intend anything. It simply collects consciousness. Xenthus's voice carried something that might have been skepticism in a crystalline species. Consciousness is an emergent property of neurological systems. It cannot be extracted, stored, or collected. What you describe violates fundamental principles. Yes, Kaida agreed. It does, and yet it happens. It's happening now. Archivist Mir was working frantically at his data station, pulling files from the Assembly's historical archive. Arbiter, if I may. His mandibles clicked nervously. There are records, scattered across species histories. 47 documented events matching this description across the past 12,000 years. I never connected them because they were classified under different categories. Medical anomalies, unexplained disappearances, mass catatonia incidents. But the pattern, the display spheres filled with data, 47 separate incidents, different species, different eras, but always the same, sudden silence, populations found alive but empty, some percentage never recovered. Who recovers them? Asked a representative from the Youth Communion, her telepathic sendings translated to speech. If consciousness is taken, who brings it back? Kaida met Xenthus's refracted gaze. The survivors do, the ones who resist the collection. In Earth's case, we had 12,000 individuals whose minds were only partially affected. They went into the space where consciousness is stored, and they guided the others back. We lost most of them in the process. That's impossible, Xenthus stated. Consciousness doesn't occupy physical space. There is nowhere to go to. The chamber's communication system interrupted with an emergency tone. The AI's voice, normally calm, carried stress markers. Alert. 73 additional stations reporting communication loss. Estimated affected population, 400 million sentient beings. The chamber went absolutely silent. Then everyone started talking at once. Marshal Koss had commanded military operations for 60 years. He had fought pirate cartels, mediated border conflicts, and planned defense strategies against theoretical alien invasions. Nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for an enemy that had no ships, fired no weapons, and left its victims alive. He stood in the Convergence Defense Coordination Center, watching tactical displays that showed nothing useful. No attacking force, no energy signatures, just star systems winking out, communication dying, and billions of sentient beings falling into silence. Analysis, he demanded. His intelligence officer, a young Vryn named Pex, looked exhausted. Sir, we can't find anything to analyze. There are no ships, no energy discharges, no spatial distortions. One moment, normal operations. Next moment, everyone in a given location becomes catatonic simultaneously. What defines the affected locations? Is there a pattern to the selection? No pattern we can identify, Marshal. It crosses species boundaries, affects both high population and low population areas, shows no preference for military or civilian targets. If it's deliberate, the selection criteria are beyond our comprehension. Koss pulled up the data from the human files Envoy Ogun had transmitted. He read through technical reports written in Earth's clinical style, detailing neurological scans of catatonia victims, psychological profiles of survivors who'd resisted the effect, descriptions of what those survivors had experienced. The descriptions made his scales itch. They described it as a vast space. He read aloud. Empty but not void, aware but not alive, A place where individual thoughts are stored like files in an archive, catalogued by species and developmental stage. They said it felt ancient, pre-galactic ancient. Sir, with respect, that's not a military intelligence report. That's mythology. Is it? Koss looked at the spreading pattern of silent systems. 36 more in the last hour. How do you fight mythology, Pex? You can't, sir. Then we need someone who can. Tomas Reyes sat in the depot's common room, hands wrapped around coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The rescue ships had arrived, medical teams swarming over Lyra Station, but the prognosis remained the same. 37 minds gone, bodies maintained by machines, no recovery protocol that anyone understood. Except humans understood, or at least they claimed to. Chosen sat across from him, reading something on her datapad. Did you know about this? About what happened on Earth? I was 8, Reyes said quietly. My older brother Raphael was stationed on New Accra, one of the colonies. I remember my parents getting the notification. I remember them crying for days. He pulled up an old file on his personal device, something he hadn't looked at in decades. They never got Raph back. He was one of the ones who went in to guide others out and didn't return. I'm sorry. He left a message, last thing he recorded before the rescue mission. Reyes had memorized it years ago, but he pulled it up anyway. Let Raphael's voice fill the quiet room. Thomas, if you're hearing this, the mission didn't work. I wanted to explain why I'm doing it. When they took us, when the collection happened, it wasn't like dying. It was like being filed away. Conscious, aware, but disconnected from everything that makes you an individual. You're still you, but you're also part of this vast catalog. I can't describe it properly. Some of us came back on our own. We don't know why. Something about human neurology, they say. Some resilience factor. But most people are still there, and they can't find their way out alone. They need guides, anchors, someone to hold on to their individuality while they remember who they are. The psychologists say it's dangerous, that guides get lost too. But Thomas, if it were you in there, wouldn't you want someone to try? I love you, little brother. Remember me as someone who chose to help. The message ended. Reyes closed the file. Your brother was a shepherd, Chosen said softly. That's what the humans call them now. I know, they're coming here. Earth is sending shepherd teams to every affected system. Reyes looked up. How many teams does Earth have? Chosen's expression was strange. According to the deployment order, 12,000 active shepherds, another 30,000 in training. 42,000 humans trained to enter psychological space and retrieve lost minds. 42,000 people prepared for a threat the rest of the galaxy had dismissed as impossible. Reyes thought about his brother lost 15 decades ago and wondered how many others Earth had sacrificed to build that capability. Shepherd Commander Yuki Tanaka had guided 2,147 minds back from the archive. She remembered every single one. The transport ship carrying her team arrived at Convergence Station under emergency authorization. Yuki stood in the deployment bay, watching her 18 shepherds run equipment checks on the neural interface rigs. Each rig cost more than a small spacecraft, represented decades of research, and could kill its operator if used incorrectly. Commander, said Okoye, her second, we have profile data on the affected species, Yeth, Borean, Quellan, Vrin, neurological structures significantly different from humans. Are we confident the anchoring protocols will work? No, Yuki said honestly. We developed the technique on human subjects, but consciousness is consciousness, regardless of the brain that generates it. The principles should translate. Should. It's what we have, Lieutenant. The bay doors opened. Envoy Ogun entered, followed by Marshal Koss and a crystalline being that Yuki's briefing files identified as Arbiter Zenthis. The Arbiter's form refracted light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Commander Tanaka, Kaida said, the Assembly has authorized full operational freedom for your teams. They'll want an explanation of your methodology. Of course. Yuki gestured to the neural rig. The device creates a controlled, altered state similar to deep meditation, but amplified through quantum-entangled neural mapping. It allows the operator's consciousness to what? Guanthi's tuastet. It cannot exist independent of, with respect, Arbiter. You're wrong. Yuki kept her voice level. Consciousness exists in the brain, yes, but during a collection event, it's copied to somewhere else, a non-spatial archive that exists. She paused, searching for words. adjacent to normal space, not physically present, but psychologically accessible to minds in certain states. That is mysticism, not science. It was mysticism, Yuki agreed, until we developed instruments that could measure it. The archive has a signature, faint, but detectable with the right equipment, and once detected, it can be accessed. She pulled up a display showing neurological scans during Shepard operations. This is my brain activity during a retrieval. Normal waking consciousness operates at approximately 40 Hz. During archive access, frequency drops to 0.5 Hz, slower than delta sleep, while maintaining full awareness. It shouldn't be possible, but it is. Koss studied the data. How dangerous is this operation, Commander? 12.3% of Shepards who enter the archive don't return. Their consciousness gets diffused. Lost in the vastness of it, we lose approximately 1 operator for every 8 successful retrievals. The number hung in the air. Koss's 4 hands clenched. That's an unacceptable casualty rate. Yes, Marshal, but it's better than 100% loss for the victims. Yuki met his eyes. We don't do this because it's safe. We do it because it's necessary. Xanthus remained silent for a long moment. Then demonstrate. Show us this archive. The viewing chamber adjacent to the medical bay had been designed for observing surgical procedures. Now it held 43 species representatives, watching as Yuki Tanaka lay down in a neural rig and prepared to leave her body behind. Subject: Commander Tanaka, Yuki, age 41, 15 years, Shepard experience, 2,147 successful retrievals. The medical AI's voice provided clinical narration. Neural interface active. Consciousness transition beginning in 30 seconds. Kaida watched the biometric displays. Yuki's heart rate was dropping, respiration slowing, but her neural activity was increasing exponentially. Patterns emerged on the monitors that looked like nothing Kaida had seen in any medical scan. Transition complete. Operator has achieved archive state. On the neural activity monitor, Yuki's consciousness signature changed. It was still present in her brain, but there was something else, a connection, thin as spider silk extending from her mind towards somewhere else. Commander Tanaka, can you hear us? Asked the medical officer. Yuki's voice came through the rig's interface, distant and strange. I hear you, I'm in. Describe what you're experiencing. The archive is vast. Imagine a library where every book is alive, every page a mind, every word a thought. I'm moving through. Corridors isn't the right word. Conceptual spaces organized by species classification. I can see the recent additions, the victims from this collection cycle. They're here, catalogued, preserved. Preserved for what purpose? Xanthus demanded. Unknown. The archive doesn't explain itself. It simply is. A mechanism. Ancient beyond measurement. Can you retrieve one of the recent victims? Yes. Selecting a Borean subject from Station Lyra. The signature matches. Engineer class. Age 53 standard years. Designation. Yuki's voice wavered. Souls don't have designations. This person was someone. Is someone just lost? On the medical monitors in the adjacent bay, one of the catatonic Borean victims showed a spike in neural activity. Beginning anchoring protocol. I'm establishing identity markers, memories, emotional patterns, sense of self, creating a pathway back. This is the dangerous part. If I anchor too strongly, I could trap myself. If I anchor too weakly, they'll drift back into the archive. Kaida watched the process, hardly breathing. This was what Rafael Reyes had done, what 12,000 humans before him had done, reaching into the void to drag souls back to light. Contact established, guiding them toward waking consciousness. Almost there. Almost. The Borean victim gasped. 4 eyes snapped open. All 4 arms began to shake. A sound emerged from his throat, wordless and terrible, the sound of someone who had been nowhere, and was now violently somewhere again. Medical teams swarmed in, but the Borean was already trying to speak. I was gone. I was in a place where I wasn't me, where nothing was separate, where... He broke off, mandibles clicking in distress. Someone came for me, held me together while I remembered my name. In the neural rig, Yuki's voice was barely a whisper. Retrieval successful. I'm coming back. Her consciousness signature snapped back fully into her brain. Heart rate and respiration returned to normal. She opened her eyes and Kaida saw something in them that made her chest ache. Exhaustion. Yes, but also profound sadness. 1 down, Yuki said quietly. 47 million to go. Archivist Mir had not slept in 60 hours. He sat surrounded by data spheres, pulling every historical record he could access about silence events. 47 documented incidents across 12,000 years. But as he dug deeper, searching through fragmentary records and half-forgotten databases, he found more. 93 incidents, once he included events classified under other designations. 127, if he counted anomalies that matched the pattern but hadn't been formally recorded. The more he looked, the more he found. It's cyclical, he muttered to himself, mandibles clicking softly. Every 130 years, plus or minus 15, for at least 15,000 years, probably longer. A regular harvest. Harvest of what? Asked a voice behind him. Mia turned to find witness Ilera, the Ith representative. Her telepathic species normally avoided speaking aloud, but she'd been making exceptions since the crisis began. I don't know, Mia admitted. Consciousness patterns, genetic data encoded in neural structures, or perhaps, he pulled up another file. Perhaps nothing utilitarian at all. Perhaps it's just documentation. Documentation. The universe documenting itself. Recording which species achieved sentience, what their thoughts felt like, how their minds worked. Mia's voice grew quieter. An archive of everyone who was ever conscious, a memorial to thinking things. Illyra was silent for a moment. Then, with visible effort, I was at Station Lyra when the collection happened. I should have been taken with the others, but I wasn't. Not fully. My species' telepathy creates a distributed consciousness. I have my individual mind, yes, but I'm also always partially connected to my communion. When the collection came, it tried to take me, but the connection to my communion held me partially anchored. You experienced it directly. I was in both places simultaneously, here and in the archive. I felt myself being copied, catalogued, filed, and I felt the vastness of what had collected us. Her hands trembled. It's not malicious. That's somehow worse. It's just fulfilling its function, recording us, preserving the fact that we existed and thought and felt. Who built it? Something that existed before any of us. Something that wanted to ensure the universe remembered. Mia looked at the historical data again, seeing it with new understanding. 15,000 years of collections, minimum, probably much longer. How many species had been archived? How many would continue to be archived, cycle after cycle, until the universe itself grew cold? Can it be stopped, he asked. Illyra's expression, as much as her species could form expressions, was bleak. Commander Tanaka says no. The archive isn't physical. You can't destroy it with weapons, or disable it with viruses. It simply is, like gravity or time. All we can do is retrieve the ones who get taken. Then humanity's shepherds will bear this burden forever, unless we learn to do it ourselves. By the 7th day of the crisis, 230 million sentient beings had been taken. Yuki stood in the Convergence Assembly Command Center, coordinating deployments across 40 sectors. 12,000 shepherds working 18-hour shifts, retrieving minds one by one from an archive that held billions. Sector 7 reports 83% retrieval rate, reported Okoye. Sector 12 is at 76%. Sector 21, he paused, 54%. We've lost 4 shepherds there. The density of collected minds is creating navigational difficulties in the archive. Yuki pulled up the data. Sector 21 had been hit hardest. 15 star systems, population density high. Too many minds stored too close together in conceptual space, creating a kind of cognitive storm that made individual identification nearly impossible. Rotate fresh teams into 21. Pull the current operators before we lose more. She rubbed her eyes. She'd been coordinating for 6 days straight, refusing to sleep while her shepherds were at risk. Commander, Kaida Ugun's voice came through the comm. Assembly needs to know, can we recover everyone?
No. The word hurt to say. At current pace, we'll retrieve approximately 80%. The remaining 20%, Yuki swallowed. The remaining 20% are too deep in the archive, too diffused. Retrieving them would require shepherds to go so deep they wouldn't return. Silence on the line. 50 million people, Kaida said finally. Yes, I know what it is, Envoy. I've done the math. I've made the decision. Yuki's voice hardened. 50 million lost forever, or 50 million plus 12,000 shepherds lost forever. Those are the options. I wasn't criticizing, Commander. I was grieving. Yuki closed her eyes. Get in line. Zenthis had existed for 800 years. In that time, he had believed consciousness to be a computational phenomenon, reducible to logic and mathematics. The universe operated according to principles that could be measured, predicted, controlled. He had been wrong about everything. The crystalline arbiter stood in an observation chamber, watching a shepherd named Park guide a Vryn child back from the archive. The child's mind had been catalogued for 6 days, stored in a conceptual space that shouldn't exist, retrieved by a human who entered a trance state and became something that defied every principle of materialist philosophy. The child opened her eyes, asked for her mother, started crying. Park emerged from the neural rig, trembling with exhaustion. That's 23 today. I can do maybe 2 more before I'm unsafe. Why unsafe? Zenthis asked. Park looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Because if I go too deep, too tired, I'll get lost. My identity will dissolve into the archive, and I'll become one more consciousness that needs rescuing.
We have protocols. 2 more retrievals, then mandatory rest. You are risking permanent psychological dissolution to save a species not your own. Yes. Why? Park's laugh was bitter. Because someone has to. Because we can. Because humanity learned something 15 decades ago that apparently the rest of the galaxy never figured out. Consciousness is precious. All consciousness. Every thinking thing that can suffer deserves someone to hold on to them when they're falling into the void. Xanthus processed this. In his species' computational philosophy, consciousness was an emergent property, valuable but not inherently sacred. Individuals mattered less than civilizational continuity, but Park's framework was different. Each mind was irreplaceable. Each loss was absolute. Humanity's philosophy is inefficient, Xanthus observed. Yeah. Park stood, preparing to enter the rig again. But it's ours. Xanthus watched the human lie down, watched consciousness transition into that impossible state, watched another mind guided back to light. And for the first time in 800 years, he wondered if efficiency was the wrong metric. The archive had noticed the shepherds. That was what Yuki realized during her 20th retrieval of the day. The vast ancient mechanism that had been passively collecting consciousness for millennia had registered that something was actively removing archived minds. It wasn't resisting exactly. The archive had no agency, no intention, but it was adjusting, compensating, making the retrieval process subtly more difficult. Abort, Yuki said suddenly. All shepherds, abort retrievals immediately. Across 40 sectors, shepherds began the emergency withdrawal protocol. Most succeeded. 17 didn't respond. Command, this is Shepherd Okafor, Sector 7. I'm stuck. The pathway back is... It's like the archive is rewriting itself faster than I can navigate. I can't find the anchor point. Yuki's blood went cold. Hold position, Okafor. Do not proceed deeper. We're sending a retrieval team. Commander. Okafor's voice was calm, resigned. We both know retrieval teams don't work on shepherds. We go too deep to follow. It's okay. I'm leaving my consciousness signature clear. Use it as a waypoint. Maybe it'll help others navigate. Okafor, that's an order. Maintain position. My choice, Commander. Tell my family I walked in willingly. Tell them it mattered. The connection ended. Yuki pulled up the casualty list. 23 shepherds lost in the past hour, all experienced operators, all following proper protocol. The archive wasn't fighting back, it was just adapting to an unexpected variable, and that adaptation was lethal. Marshal Koss entered the command center. Commander Tanaka, what's happening? The archive is learning. Yuki's voice was flat, empty. It's adjusting its structure to retain collected minds more securely, which means we're in a race. We need to retrieve as many as possible before the adjustment completes, or the collection becomes permanent for everyone still archived. How long? Unknown. Days, hours, but every minute we delay, the window closes further. Koss's 4 hands clenched. What do you need? Permission to drop all safety protocols. Push every shepherd past their operational limits. Accept that we'll lose. Yuki did the math. Approximately 300 more operators, but retrieve an additional 20 million minds. The number hung between them. 300 human lives for 20 million others. That's not my decision to authorize, Koss said quietly. That's yours, Commander. You're the one sending them in. Yuki stood, walked to the communication array, opened a channel to all 12,000 shepherds currently deployed. This is Commander Tanaka. The situation has changed. The archive is adapting, and we're running out of time. I'm authorizing emergency protocol Lazarus, unrestricted depth, extended operation, waived safety margins. This is voluntary. Any shepherd who chooses not to participate will face no consequences, but those who do accept. She paused. Statistical models predict 30% casualties. You'll be going deeper than anyone has ever gone, and some of you won't find your way back. I need you to decide now. The responses came in within seconds. 12,000 shepherds, 12,000 acceptance confirmations, not one refusal. Yuki closed her eyes. Then get back to work. Bring them home. The next 48 hours blurred together into a nightmare of coordination, loss, and impossible choices. Shepherds pushed past exhaustion, entering the archive 6, 7, 8 times in a single shift. Retrieval rates climbed, 90% in some sectors, 95% in others, but the cost mounted. 1 shepherd per 100 retrievals, 2 per 100, 5 per 100 as the archive's adaptation accelerated. Tomas Reyes watched from Crosspoint Depot as the casualties mounted. Names scrolling past on incident reports. Shepherd Park lost. Shepherd Okafor lost. Shepherd Tanaka's entire Sector 12 team lost in a navigational collapse that trapped them in a conceptual recursion loop. Commander Tanaka herself had entered the archive 17 times in 36 hours. Her last mission report had been barely coherent, consciousness degrading from repeated transitions. But she'd brought back a Quellan child, age 4, who would grow up never knowing that a human woman had dissolved part of her own identity to preserve his. On the 47th hour, the archive's adaptation completed. All teams, this is command. Yuki's voice came through, hoarse and hollow. The retrieval window has closed. The archive has restructured. Any minds still collected are beyond our reach. All shepherds, return to normal consciousness immediately. Kaida Ogun stood in the assembly chamber, reading the final statistics to representatives from 43 species. Total affected, 230 million sentient beings. Successfully retrieved, 194 million. Permanently lost, 36 million. Human casualties, 407 shepherds lost, 3,218 suffering permanent psychological damage. The chamber was silent. Humanity did not request this burden. Kaida continued. We did not seek to become the galaxy's cognitive rescue service. But we developed the capability because we remembered what it felt like to be helpless. We trained 42,000 shepherds because we knew this would happen again. And now, she paused. Now we're asking the rest of you to learn, to train your own people in these techniques, because the next collection will come in 130 years, and humanity cannot bear this weight alone forever. Zenthis rose. The crystalline arbiter's voice carried harmonics that Kaida had learned to recognize as regret. The assembly acknowledges humanity's sacrifice. Earth will be granted Cognitive Security Council authority, with jurisdiction over consciousness preservation, archive research, and shepherd training programs. Furthermore, he paused. Furthermore, the Assembly formally apologizes for its initial dismissal of Earth's warnings. Had we listened, preparations could have begun sooner. Casualties might have been lower. Apologies don't resurrect the dead, Kaida said quietly, but they're a start. 3 months after the crisis, engineer Thomas Reyes received an unexpected message. It came from Earth's Cognitive Defense Initiative, marked with his brother's personnel code. Reyes opened it, hands shaking. Dear Thomas, you don't know me, but I knew your brother Raphael. I was part of his shepherd cohort 15 decades ago. We trained together, deployed together. I was there when he went into the archive for his final retrieval. I wanted you to know that your brother didn't get lost. He made a choice. During the mass retrieval operation after Earth's first collection, he found a group of children, 27 of them, trapped in a deep section of the archive. The only way to guide them all out was to create a permanent anchor, a consciousness that would remain behind to hold the pathway stable. Raphael volunteered. He stayed in the archive, maintaining the anchor while the rest of us brought those children home. 27 lives for one. He thought it was a fair trade. His consciousness is still there, part of the archive structure now woven into its fabric. Every shepherd who enters can feel him, a warm point in the vastness, a reminder that someone stayed behind willingly. He guides us, even now. I thought you should know your brother didn't just die saving others, he's still saving them. Every successful retrieval uses the pathway he's holding open. He's not lost, Tomas. He's just waiting. With respect, Shepherd Commander Yuki Tanaka. Reyes read the message 3 times. Then he pulled up the Shepherd Training Program application form. The galaxy needed more guides, more anchors, more people willing to walk into the void so others could find their way home. He thought about Raphael, alone in the vastness for 150 years, holding a doorway open for strangers to return through. Thought about the 407 shepherds who'd just made the same choice. Thought about the 36 million people who would never return, and the 194 million who had. He filled out the application. Someone had to stand watch. Someone had to remember. Someone had to be willing to stay behind so others could go home. Humanity had learned that lesson in blood and grief. Now they were teaching it to the galaxy, one rescued mind at a time. Envoy Kaida Ogun stood on the observation deck of Convergence Station, watching human ships depart. Each carried shepherd instructors assigned to train other species in the techniques humanity had developed through trauma and necessity. Arbiter Zenthis approached silently, a feat for a being made of resonant crystal. I have been studying human philosophy, Zenthis said, attempting to understand the framework that produces shepherds, why your species values individual consciousness so intensely, and what did you learn? That humanity evolved alone. Most spacefaring species developed on worlds with other sentient species, other competing intelligences. They learned early that consciousness exists on a spectrum, that minds blend and merge. But humans, Zenthis's harmonics carried something like wonder. Humans evolved as the only thinking species on Earth. You believed for your entire developmental history that consciousness was rare, precious, that every thinking mind was a miracle, and when we reached the stars and found consciousness was common, Kaida said quietly, we didn't revise our assessment, we just expanded our definition of who deserves to be saved. Inefficient, Zenthis observed. But the word carried affection now, maybe, but it's who we are. They stood in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there the archive waited. In 130 years, it would collect again. More minds lost, more desperate retrievals, more shepherds walking willingly into the void. But next time humanity wouldn't be alone. The galaxy had learned, not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them, that consciousness was precious, that every mind mattered, that the strong had an obligation to guide the lost home, regardless of cost. It had taken humanity 15 decades and thousands of lost shepherds to learn that lesson. Now they were teaching it to the stars, and perhaps in time, the archive itself might notice that the minds it collected didn't stay collected anymore. That species had learned to hold on to each other, to anchor individual identity against the vastness, to refuse to be catalogued without resistance. Perhaps the archive would adapt again. Perhaps the struggle would continue forever. Consciousness against collection, identity against dissolution, small fragile minds against the mechanism that wanted to preserve them by taking them away. But humanity had learned something else in those 15 decades. The struggle itself mattered. Not the victory, there might never be victory, but the choice to stand, to fight, to reach into darkness and refuse to let go. That was the human gift to the galaxy. Not weapons, not technology, not even the shepherds themselves, but the stubborn, inefficient, illogical insistence that every thinking thing deserved someone to hold their hand when they were falling, even if it meant falling with them. In deep space, in the archive's conceptual vastness, Rafael Reyes maintained his anchor. Around him, 407 new presences joined the eternal vigil, the shepherds lost in the recent collection, choosing to stay behind, holding the pathways open for the next crisis. They were not alone. They would never be alone again. And somewhere in the galaxy, 12,000 more humans trained to join them, learning to walk into the void, learning to guide the lost home, learning that some burdens were worth carrying forever. The archive would come again, the collection would continue, but so would humanity. And now, so would everyone else. If you found this story meaningful, consider supporting this channel. More stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet strength that defines us await. Next time, the Garden of Final Things. What happens when humanity discovers we're not the only species that refuses to let go?